Hi guys, and welcome back to Belle's Books. So today I'm going to be talking about Wanderers by Chuck Wendig, as you guessed from the title of this video and my intro, and I just have to say I absolutely loved this book. So this is a science fiction novel. So I'll start off with a little summary of the book and then tell you why I loved it and why I think you should read it. So the book begins when Shayna wakes up and finds that her little sister has left the house and is walking down the road. She seems to be sleepwalking and nobody can wake her up. As the sister kind of continues walking, more and more people join her until there is an entire flock of people just walking down the road, unable to wake up. They're followed by their families, who affectionately name themselves the shepherds of the flock, and it kind of becomes a nationwide phenomenon. However, at the same time, there's an apocalyptic epidemic going on, which is kind of shaking the world and promising to be the end of it. Alongside this, there's a self-aware kind of technological advancement made, which provides perspective on everything that's going on and kind of shapes the events of the novel. And at the same time, rural and, I guess you would say, conservative America has kind of formed their own militia. It's basically the end of the world, and the book starts at the beginning of the end of the world, but you don't quite realize that when you begin the book. So as I said before, I really enjoyed this book. You might be able to tell from the thickness, it is huge. So it's an 800-page massive novel, so I'd really recommend getting into this, especially if you're in lockdown or if you're finding yourself in the new year having quite a bit of time on your hands. So in terms of plot and narrative, I absolutely loved it. There's this kind of sinister subplot kind of thing going on that's hinted at but not quite given away, so you can kind of guess at the true enemy, the true baddie, if you will, but every time that you think you figured out who it really is, there's almost a new development or something that keeps your brain moving. The other thing I loved about the narrative is that there are so many personal and relational narratives intertwined here, and each one has its own voice. Above all, it is the story of love, as I feel like many science fiction novels are deep down, and you get loads of different experiences of different relationships. So you have Shayna and her sister, Shayna and her father, Shayna and her love interest. You have an aging rock star who's running away from himself, a preacher who loses his family and makes some terrible choices, and you have a group of white supremacists that I mentioned earlier, and you also have a few other kind of disease control scientific specialists who have their own story as well. It's a fantastically creative piece of science fiction that deals at the same time with present day political and social issues in a very honest yet kind of terrifying way, and I think this timeliness is one of the reasons that it really stood out to me as one of my favourite reads of 2020. It's really grounded in our reality and our fears, the fears of a pandemic, of artificial intelligence, of racism itself, and personally of America, because whatever's going on over there scares me sometimes. So it was genuinely terrifying and alarming, and the kind of epidemic that sweeps the world at the same time as the sleepwalkers are walking their walk was terrifying and creepy, and I think especially in context of the coronavirus, its destruction was even more alarming because it felt plausible, it felt realistic. From a social and political point of view, it was also rooted in reality. So it did deal with racism, as I mentioned, and it kind of deals with the dark side of Christianity. So I am a Christian. I am not the kind of Christian in that book, obviously, but it kind of considers how humans pervert Christianity and kind of take the Bible and use it for their own purposes. It was very sinister, and there were a lot of references to the Bible actually, which I found really interesting, but I don't know if everyone would have necessarily picked up on them, especially if you're not familiar with the Bible very much. But I did find online that there were a lot of reviews from people who hated this book because of its social and political stance, like people claiming that Wendig spent too much time interjecting his own personal opinions into the novel itself, and I'm guessing that those reviews were mostly written by conservative Republicans. That would be my guess, because as far as I can tell, what this book has done is it's taken real day issues and it's twisted them and kind of push them into a worst case scenario. What would happen if we didn't have law? What would happen at the end of the world? Who would these people become? And of course, and Wendig is clearly very liberal, and he has kind of these big ideas, and they're really interjected into the novel. But I think that for most people this is worth reading. In terms of genre, Wanderers is definitely science fiction. I also saw some reviews which are like, this isn't even science fiction. I was like, do you know what science fiction is? But anyways, yeah, so it's definitely explorative, it's science fiction. I wouldn't say that the technology it brings up is especially creative, but it is realistic, which is what makes it a really interesting piece of science fiction, I think. So my final thoughts are that this was an excellent science fiction book, and I really enjoyed the read. I think it's probably the best sci-fi book I've read this year, and definitely in a long time. I've read a lot of amazing fantasy this year, and you will hear all about that in my 2020 books video, which is coming next week. In terms of science fiction, this was definitely the best one I've read this year. It was just so creepy, and it made me nervous and anxious about the future. I hated it. And I loved it. The story is amazing. I love the characters, I love the relationships, and I hope he writes a sequel, because I feel like there is definitely space for a sequel. So comment down below what science fiction book I should read next. I'd absolutely love to hear your suggestions. I've read a lot of fantasy this year, so I'd love to read some more science fiction in 2021. So let me know in the comments down below, and thank you so much for watching. Before you leave, please don't forget to subscribe. Bye!